Coin traders, what is going on? Thanks for joining me, Algo fam. How we doing? We're going to be looking at one of our favorites, Algorand ALGO on that ticker. A little bit of a pullback going on right now as we're looking at price back below 24 cents at 23.23. So if you notice right now, we are kicking off the 12-period exponential moving average on this daily. And so especially now that we're looking at a potential complete bullish cross on these daily exponential moving averages, we could just be looking for support to the downside. So we're going to talk about a support that we're going to be looking at right now. So even to the downside, we could be looking at a pretty big support right at the 22-cent line. So even if we look left right now, for example, looking at a very nice period of closing support and then also closing support before the flush that took us down to 15.99. But if you look at what we're seeing right now based on supports, also another big support, which is pretty much where the current price is at 23 cents. So not only does that intersect with this 12-period EMA, zooming back out again, big point of resistance prior to the close, and then also support and then support again. So we know that this is also a relevant price level to be looking out for. Resistance right now coming in overhead right at the 25-cent mark. So that is what we're looking at for the daily close. So you can see several attempts to come in have tried to break above that, but bears have flushed each attempt to the downside. So we're still looking at a big point of resistance for the close on a quarter, which is one of those big psychological levels. Looking left too, big point of resistance and resistance before rejecting. So we know that this is still going to be a very big resistance, but hopefully if we can confirm support to the downside, that would likely mean either consolidation and then hopefully a bull break. Turning this level now into support would be a very ideal scenario if we do want to keep bullish momentum going. Now we are still looking at a couple of bearish things coming in for Bitcoin, especially after seeing such highs. So we know that a retracement is still possible for Bitcoin as well. A lot of downside supports to still confirm. But if we do talk about correlations, we know that Bitcoin's going to retrace a slight amount, yet altcoins are going to retrace even more. And typically we've seen that be especially true in the case of Algorand. So for example, even if we do look at a pullback to previous resistance, which would be right around 21,200 or so, that's still about a 5.5% pullback, which correlated over to the rest of the altcoin space does usually mean about 10% or so plus. So 10% from current prices would be right around the 21 to 20.7 or so level. So that's also pretty much right where we saw previous support come in on the first bounce. Not really any predictions to get there unless a lot of things change, because right now we do have supports to the downside that we're going to be looking at first. And so even retracing down to either of these are still going to be maintaining a higher low over that low point coming in right now at 20.73. Now for resistance, we are going to be looking up overhead just over the 24-cent level, since that was a big period of not only resistance on this initial move before pulling back, but then also looking left as well. Big point of closing supports on a lot of these attempts. So we know that that's going to be an extremely strong level as well. But we also know that with a quick break above and a quick flush below, that's not going to be as relevant as what we initially thought. But nonetheless, it is still going to be one of the levels that we look out for when we talk about shorter term movements. If we go ahead and pull up the RSI Relative Strength Index, then what we're looking at is what we've talked about before, a period of a high on the RSI, lower high. It's not even still overbought, but yet we do have higher highs in price. So a lot of that bearish diversions here. And we can usually confirm this pretty well too when we talk about volume. So if we look at volume, we have a very nice sloping, increasing volume to the upside on this daily. And then after this initial top, we haven't gotten as much volume on this latest move to the upside when prices did top out right at the 26-cent mark. So next indicators I do want to look at, let's look at the stochastic RSI first, because after getting smashed up into the 100 line, still trending to the downside now. So typically we do expect a break below 20 before actually starting the next cycle. So still typically that does play into a downside impact. And then now even looking at the MACD as well for the daily, we are still seeing lower bars on the histogram. And so now we're looking for that bearish cross when the MACD does cross the signal line. So I expect if we do see downside pressure to about the 22-cent level, this will be in a full bearish cross effect. And then from there, we will be seeing the MACD trend back to the downside. Flipping over to the 2-day chart right now, just want to talk about the same sort of support levels. So you can see exponential moving averages for the 12 and the 26 having a nice little cross right now, but pretty much coming in right at about the 22-cent line as well. So we know 22 cents is going to be a pretty big downside target based on a lot of these technicals as well as the exponential moving average targets. If we flip over to the 4-hour right now and pull up a Fibonacci from the low to the current trend high right at 26 cents right now, you can see we've already blown below the 50% retracement line. So the next up would be 61.8, which is 22.74. And then below that, just below the 22-cent target we set is the 78.6 coming in at 21.85. Now, given the fact that this candle has had such a big magnitude, so let's, for example, draw a line and we can see just how big this one body is. So you can see all of the big candles that it took, starting with this one before we actually broke in order to see this upside. So all of this amount of upside in gains was actually erased in one single candle. So this does show a lot of strength and the fact that we are expecting this to be the current trend high right now. And so we are focusing now on cooling down and testing some of these lower supports to actually confirm a longer uptrend, because right now we have lost the shorter term uptrend. So even if we look at the 1 hour, for example, obviously extremely apparent after seeing our high, pulling down, setting a lower high, and then now obviously an extreme lower low. So moves like this do pretty much solidify and confirm that this is our trend top right now. So I'm not expecting any new trend highs for at least a couple of days, obviously barring some sort of huge news catalyst. And so actually, speaking of, do want to make a comment on the new announcement that the Algorand Foundation has appointed a chief marketing officer, or CMO, Jessica Tsai. And so especially after listening to the spaces this morning where she introduced herself and Stacy talked about her background and things like that, I am a little bit more optimistic and especially a little bit more confident that the Algorand Foundation is actually going to be doing some good stuff for marketing exposure and longer term growth in products. They also made a tweet announcement about it, so they've got her tag here. So if you want to go over and drop her a follow as well. And also if you're not following me as well on Twitter, at coin_trades is the handle. Do love chatting with everyone over there. And so earlier today too, did make a tweet about a news announcement that pretty much confirmed one of the things I had mentioned earlier about the sentiment shift, which mostly points to just how crazy of a flip we went from extremely bearish to all of a sudden extremely bullish that the bottom was in and all of that. So typically we don't have that, and that's very atypical for markets. And I did make a tweet earlier about that as well, just talking about how atypical it is for any sort of financial market, not only just specifically crypto, but just to have that sort of sentiment shift so quick is typically problematic, and it does lead to pretty big and substantial sell-offs without a lot of basis for support coming in. But yeah, so someone over on Twitter pointed out kind of how ironic it is that Algorand finally releases some good news about the new CMO coming in, and then there's an immediate price dump and flush right after. It's obviously ironic since we are tied to the rest of the crypto space and we've been overbought and all of that stuff, but nonetheless still amusing. So one thing we are need to pay attention to is whether or not we actually end up pulling back and then setting a lower high and then end up sort of making a head and shoulders pattern to end up retracing a little bit more on some of the longer term time frames. Because if we move over to the weekly, you can see how we had 4 nice weeks of just very nice upside. Let's actually expand this a little bit. And so still right now, we can't just have a lot of this upside and confirm strength without pulling back and establishing a weekly higher low. So since we are so driven to the charts on the longer term, that's exactly what we're going to need to see, which could end up seeing prices pulling back down to as low as about 19 cents. And so based on a Fibonacci retracement, for example, if we look at the low up to the current trend high right now at 26, then you can see the 19.83 is the 61.8. So we could be looking at that or right around the 19, like I was talking about. 19.5, I believe, was our previous resistance. So yeah, definitely a downside pullback to that support level would be extremely nice, confirm a much higher low, and then be able to allow the bulls to retake control again. But obviously a lot of that is based on the strength of the rest of the crypto market and whether or not this little move just ends up being a little bit of a bull trap and ends up flipping the sentiment back bearish once again. Personally, I'm not overly optimistic. Now, that's not to say that this is the low and we couldn't see a higher low or whether or not the bottom is in or anything just yet, but I'm still on the fence about whether or not I do think that there's any big reason to get overly bullish or overly bearish right now. So pretty much it is coming down to just reacting to what the market is doing. And that's why in my last video, when I talked about riding this up and then selling my no-touch hold and then buying back in at these support levels and then making nice trades on this way up, that was all based on a plan that I had ahead of time, not necessarily making predictions one way or the other, but just reacting on the shorter time frames to what the market's been doing based on breaking price and support levels. So yeah, would love to know everyone's predictions, thoughts, and your strategies and all of that down below, what you're doing right now in the crypto space, especially for Algorand, and also what you think of the new CMO announcement. But otherwise, that is going to go ahead and wrap up the show for today, though. Hope everyone enjoyed and is staying safe in this little pullback right here. As always, if you have enjoyed the show, would appreciate hitting the thumbs up, like, and subscribe button if you haven't done so just yet. Also, drop me a note down below because I do love chatting with each and every one of you. Appreciate all the support as always, means so much. Stay safe, take care, everyone, and I'll catch you back in the next video.